It's showtime. Welcome to Chapter 2 of Bet On You. I've been playing around with names for my follow-up book, and I wonder about Bet On You 2. Like, Look Who's Talking To. Or Die Hard with a Vengeance. Bet On You with a Vengeance. Any ideas for the next book title? World's Best Courage Coach comes to mind as well. Picking a book title name is very challenging, and I'm very blessed that the man who wrote the foreword there, Mr. Les Brown, gave me the title for this book, Bet On You. So shout out to you, Les, if you happen to be jumping on the live. So chapter 2 is called The Dragon Chaser. The fascinating part of my own degenerate gambling habits, when I did win, I'd immediately increase the size of the next bet to try and achieve the same euphoria as before. Recovered heroin addicts call this chasing the dragon. Except in my case, my dragon was a purebred horse. The first sliver of light entered my world after that first phone call with Mary. Mary arranged for me to meet with a gambling psychologist and attend one-on-one sessions run by the Salvation Army. It was free professional therapy, and thank Christ for that, because I had less assets than post-World War II Germany. It was free professional therapy, and thank Christ... Oh, I said that. Oh, do you know what? I've started chapter 3. I've missed out. That's a wee taster for the next live. I was like, this doesn't sound like chapter 2. It's been a little while since I read this. This one, chapter 2. This is chapter 2. This is called How to Hit Rock Bottom. The irony's not lost. How to Hit Rock Bottom, chapter 2. Deep in the bowels of a semi-detached house in the inner suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, I caught a glimpse of my future for the very first time. It was a bleak destiny, one I neither planned for nor wanted. A place so dark that even fistfuls of ignited magnesium ribbon could not permeate its all-encompassing darkness. There I was, gambling on a horse race in a country I was not in, using money I did not have, and knocking on a Pandora's box I never wanted to open. I sat upright in my bed, laptop open, awash in a blue hue, something akin to the ultraviolet light bulbs installed in public toilets that prevent intravenous drug users from finding a vein. All was not lost. However, I still had food in the pantry, so that if I blew the rent again, my major problems would not involve going hungry. And speaking of food, the meal Toad in the Hole was a favourite dish, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony after being forced to rename it In the Hole. I had lost thousands of dollars doing this exact same thing many nights before, but rather than dwell, I focused on my next major fix. But I was not alone that night. I had a great mate with me, a friend that could persuade the unpersuadable, would always say yes and never say no to some reckless, absurd, and crazy adventure. A friend that acted as my confidant, my worst enemy, and everything in between. I'd love for you to meet alcohol. 3 bottles of appropriately priced Pinot Noir navigated its way through my veins, my poor liver bearing the brunt of it, now sluggish, fatty, and agitated at such abuse. That warm, safe, and comfortable feeling that I had grown accustomed to when drunk had long since disappeared into an anxious state of fight or flight, driven by my skyrocketing cortisol levels. But red wine helps me relax. Well, that's what I assume too. It helps me deal with the daily grind and repressed traumas. It frees me from the tyranny of reality. Like socializing with friends and family members I tolerate, but can't actually stand. Does it really? For me, at a key crossroad in my life, I opted to squander money. Rent money, food budgets, credit card advances, tax returns, and birthday cash from a great aunt I always promised to visit, but never did. And even if Bezos, Gates, and Musk had pulled their cash together to fund my degeneracy, it still would have never been enough, as it never filled that huge gaping hole of escapism. In earlier times in my life, I had been virtuous, judging heroin addicts who sought so desperately their next hit. But there I was, no better than them, except maybe for my living conditions. And looking through my rose-coloured glasses, everything on the surface was under control. I was a tax-paying citizen with plenty of great mates. I held down great jobs, smashed sales targets, maintained wonderful relationships with my colleagues, and appeased and supported my manager. I turned up on time, mostly kept my word, and washed my bed sheets and pillowcases weekly. I paid my bills, posted tailored birthday messages on the social media pages of my many, many friends, assisted grandmothers across the road, carried their groceries, and on one special occasion, reinvigorated their life. But more about that later. But telling myself that I was in full control was about the biggest, fattest, ugliest fib I've ever told. And boy, have I told a few. Focusing my attention back towards the screen, I noticed a phone number in the bottom left-hand corner. Why haven't I seen that before, I asked myself. Further inspection revealed it to be the number for the Gambler's Helpline. I read the number aloud slowly and raised my index finger like a golfer testing for wind speed. I paused and then dialed. Instinctively, I knew I needed more oxygen for what was about to transpire, so I sucked in a huge breath as if preparing to break a free dive record. The memory of doing something so scary yet so empowering will never leave me. That anxious, cortisol-y feeling was quickly replaced with adrenaline, hope, and excitement, but mainly adrenaline. Ring, 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 ring. The phone line clicked. Hello, this is Mary, your guardian angel. How may I protect you? Warm and silky like a chocolate fountain, Mary's voice cascaded down the line and enveloped my whole body. Mary, yes, like Mary Magdalene. She was my guardian angel, whether she liked it or not. A counsellor for 20 years, Mary specialised in the treatment of problem gambling. And Mary, she had seen it all. After probing me with some gentle open questions, I started to share everything and the unloading began. It had taken all of my life to make this huge leap, and I'd be damned if I was leaving anything out. She listened with the patience of a saint, and my verbal diarrhea ended about the same time poor Mary nearly broke. When she had an opportunity to respond, she spoke of the disproportionately high rates of suicide that problem gamblers experience. According to the National Council on Problem Gambling, 1 in 5 pathological gamblers attempt suicide, a rate higher than for any other addictive disorder. She went on to explain it's because gamblers lose everything so much more quickly compared to the other major addictive behaviours, such as drinking, drugs, porn or sex. That bone-jarring statistic shook me to the core. I hadn't been that scared since I was a young lad watching Stephen King's terrifying horror flick, It. Oh yes, they float, Georgie. They float. And when you're down here with me, you'll float too. Probably should have given you a trigger warning with that. Growing up, being depressed, anxious and vulnerable was often associated with weakness. It was uncomfortably glossed over like that inappropriate drunk boss we've all had whose hands start wandering at the staff Christmas party. We used to tolerate that back then, but as with old Hansy McGee, it's probably time we called out this very dangerous mental health elephant in the room. This is especially important because in my own home country of New Zealand, the suicide rate for male youth in 2017 was the third highest across the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And female youth suicide rate was the highest. And we're talking about highly desired countries to live in here. And that shows me that we're not immune to this challenge anywhere in the world. Mary's words made me ponder how many lives had ended long before their full potential was reached. What impact on the world could those souls have had if they allowed themselves to attain their dream life? We'll likely never know the answer to that question until we can keep people around long enough to find out. Laban's random lessons. Many people experience the same types of thoughts, fears, and worries I do/did. Number 1, fear of judgment for admitting I have a problem by calling the helpline and making it real, right? 2, a fear of shame for not being as tough as I thought as I needed to be. And 3, fear of what my life would look like without insert negative behavior in it. The good news, most of those fears never eventuated, and if they did, the impact was minor. The sheer relief outshone everything else, making fears a distant memory. Think about it. What would your life look like with your demons under control? Who around you would that positively impact? Your children, siblings, parents, hell, even your grandparents. Many times people in our lives are just waiting for another person to make the first move. Maybe you should be the first person for once. And remember what Les Brown says, don't underestimate yourself. You are capable of more than you can ever imagine. So into chapter 2. Thank you for listening. And you got a sneak peek if you were listening at the very beginning of what chapter 3. I think I'll read chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3 is quite short. So I go back to that period of my life, and I had a good job. I was working in recruitment in Australia at the time, and my appointments with the psychologist were weekly. I think they were on a Thursday, like 1 p.m, and I'd disappear off and go and have these free sessions. And I was never a really big journaler or note taker. There was periods there when I was writing down some of the stuff that was going on, but I remember just the absolute sheer relief of getting rid of so much of that emotional burden in my life, and what a wonderful feeling that was. And there was still quite a lot of shame. I don't think I was actually telling anyone that I was getting access to the gambling psychologist for a little while. Maybe my younger brother. And it takes me back. And what a crazy period of my life, because I was still drinking and partying and yahooing and still creating a lot of negative energy in my life at times. But that was really the beginning of the healing journey, and what a wonderful flow-on waterfall effect that had on my life. And I'm so grateful. And wherever you are listening or watching this, if they don't have free resources like the gambling psychologist, and you're not in a position financially to invest in it, because I estimate that it would have been at least $100 $150 an hour worth of counselling over in Australia. If you don't have any financial resources, you've got a few options which maybe you don't even realise. And reading about this stuff is really powerful. But if you can find someone that has gone through what you've gone through and figure out a way to connect with them in a way that is adding value to their life, and what I mean by that is, so many successful people that you'll see, Gary Vaynerchuk and Brené Brown and Jack Canfield and a number of these people, depending on who you resonate with, if you go into trying to connect with these kind of people with a what can I get out of this conversation, you won't go very far, because you can imagine being at that level of profile where a number of people are reaching out to you, just help me, and it's just you can't give away too much without it having a really negatively profound impact on your life. And if you can figure out a way to really think about what value can I add this person's life. And you'll hear me talk about this a lot, but all of us have a Michael Jordan level genius at something, right? And what you'll find is that once you own what that genius is, that'll go a long way to adding a lot of value. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So on the podcast in 2021, early 2021, I think, I interviewed Jack Canfield, who I just mentioned, who co-authored the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series and had a smash hit book with Success Principles. Been on Oprah Winfrey a number of times and is regarded as the number one success coach in North America, probably the world. And through a very good friend of mine, Chris Salem, who introduced us and got the podcast happening, and it was organised through his executive assistant. So I didn't actually get a chance to speak to Jack before he came on the podcast, which is not typical. I normally have spoken to the people on the phone or, have had first-hand experience. He came on, he was very cold and distant. And I know he'd been on a book tour, he'd been doing a countless number of virtual podcasts. It was right in the middle of the pandemic and very, very cold. And I thought, oh man, what am I going to do here? And so I said to him, hey, Jack, before we even started recording. And he said, yeah, Laban. I said, I got a commitment for you. He goes, what's that? I said, you are going to leave this podcast with more energy than when you started. Now, that was free. I didn't have anything else I could really offer him at that time, right? And he responded really well. He goes, his shoulders went back and he's like, I'm going to hold you to that, Laban. I'm going to hold you to that commitment. The first question I asked him, I go, all right, let's do this podcast. First question I asked him, I said, Jack, at that time, I said, Anna and I, my then fiance, have gone through the loss of what was 14 consecutive miscarriages. What advice would you give us to help bring this baby into the world? And I don't know where that question came from, but apart from wanting to help shed some light on it, and he'd never been asked that question before, and I found that out later. I'm not surprised. But he answered it so beautifully because that was his sweet spot. Like, he's a success coach. And it wasn't how much money did you make from selling Chicken Soup for the Soul, like the stuff that he gets asked all the time. And the second question I asked him, because he really sprung into life at this point. The second question I asked him, I said, Jack, what do you need help with? And he very arrogantly responded. He said, I don't need help with anything, Laban. I've got everything I need. And then he thought about it for a little bit longer and he said, actually, I've been, okay, all right, I do have one challenge. I suppose that is a challenge. He said, I've been trying to lose 15 pounds of belly fat for the last couple of years. And I said to him, hey, Jack, he goes, what's that, Laban? I said, today's your lucky day. He laughed. He goes, what's that, Laban? I said, because what I didn't tell you about my magnificent transformation was that I lost 60 pounds of body fat, put on 30 pounds of muscle, and if that's something you want to have a discussion with at the end of the show, you can just ask me. And so we did the rest of the podcast, and it was brilliant because he felt valued and appreciated, and he felt like he was getting something out of it. And then at the end of it, I had the number one success coach in the world picking my brain and asking me for my advice on what I did with this carnivore diet, and he was asking me all these questions about it, and very knowledgeable on keto, but he hadn't gone into the depths that I knew about, right? And the reason I wanted to share this story with you was that was my Michael Jordan level genius, and that interaction was a magnificent watershed moment in my life, because I realized that I could play at the top. And I'd spoken to a number of really high-profile people at that time, but that really made me believe that I could add value to people that I deemed to be up here and was putting on a pedestal incorrectly. And it turns out, the more time I spend with people that have a high profile for whatever reason, and it's not the reason, it's not because they have a high profile is the reason I want to hang out with them. It's the byproduct stuff. It's the reason they're doing things that most people don't do, and I love that. And that's allowed me to play at the highest level. And so now I go into every single interaction with what value can I add this person's life, right? And if you're at a point where your self-esteem is shot, confidence is down because you're grappling with addiction in any form, I'd encourage you to just dig deeper. dig a little bit deeper and figure out, okay, I might be feeling down in the dumps and not feeling very worthwhile at the moment. What is it that I possess? What knowledge, what have I endured and gone through and come out the other side of that would be valuable? And another example that I can share with you that just happened the other day. I connected with a guy on LinkedIn who's Mr. Beast's manager. And I connected with him for another reason, to try and connect with him, to connect another friend. And Mr. Beast, for those who don't know, is almost the number one YouTuber. He has nearly 100 million subscribers on YouTube. Amazing guy. His channel is all about giving away money and improving people's lives. It's really entertaining, and I encourage you to check it out. And he's been battling with Crohn's disease his whole life, or a large portion of his life. And so I was like, what value can I add to this person's life? And so I sent this guy who's the manager a message just saying, hey, it's Laban Ditchburn here. Do you know if Mr. Beast, I forget his real name, is still battling with Crohn's? If he is, I know I can introduce him to two people that have put Crohn's into full remission using diet, using no medication. Now, I probably won't get a response, but sometimes I do. And if you think about, like, what kind of impact, you want to change the world. What about changing the world by proxy, by giving knowledge to someone who's already got a huge platform that might help them live longer or have more energy or not be in horrible pain? Like Crohn's disease is an insidious autoimmune response. Insidious. And so that's what's on my mind today. I'm looking forward to doing more of these lives, and I'm going to try and figure out a way to see some more of these comments. My darling Anna has been able to jump on and comment here, but we'll get that sorted. But look forward to chapter 3 and 4, I think we'll do next time. And I enjoy sharing this time with you. So have a great day if you're not having one, and if you are, well, keep up the good work, would you?